We talked about at the end of last lesson how we're going to talk about how to query a view instead of a table in SQL, and just what the subtle difference is between a view and a table. So if you look over in the Object Explorer here, and I expand databases, and again we're working with the AdventureWorks 2012 database, we've been looking at this tables folder, but instead let's look at this views folder. Let's see what we have. So you'll notice that they still have the same schema set up: human resources, person, production, purchasing, sales. But the naming is a little bit different, and even the little symbol's different. So most views, you'll see V or VW or something like that, indicating that the object is a view instead of a table. And you can think of a view as sort of a virtual table, for lack of a better term. So anytime that you query a view, you're actually executing a SQL statement. So instead of having to rewrite a bunch of joins, which is a concept we'll talk about later, to gather a bunch of related information, we can query a view, which makes our lives a little bit easier. And in later sections, we'll talk about how to create views and a little bit more about how to access them. But for now, just kind of equate a view as a virtual table. So there's a little subtle difference, but we're going to query views the same way. And we're going to use views quite a bit until we cover that concept of joins that I've been mentioning, because if you've noticed, you'll see a lot of ID columns in the table, and that's again another concept that we'll explain when we talk about database normalization and data warehousing. But the views are going to make our lives a little bit easier, and we're going to see information in a more consolidated way without having to worry about IDs and things like that. So it's going to be a little cleaner. So that's all a view really is, and that's all we have to worry about for now. And so let's just practice a few examples on querying those views instead of querying a table. So I'm just going to click in here and create a new window, or a new query. And let's just take a look at one of these views. So I'm going to return all rows and all columns from the human resources.vEmployee view, which we see here. So to do that, again, we start off with select, and then we're going to use the star or asterisk to say that we want to return all columns, and from, and again, we're going to type out the full name of the table, the full name of the view, human resources.vEmployee. I'm going to press F5, and you'll see that here is my result set. You'll notice there's a lot of information here. First name, last name, but then the job title, phone number, email address, email promotion, all this sort of stuff about the employee. Well, if I go over here and try to find the human resources.employee table, let's take a look at what that looks like instead. Human resources.employee. Now notice that I'm querying the table, not the view. So I'm going to highlight this, and this brings us to another subtle point within Management Studio. Management Studio will execute either the code that is highlighted or all code in the query editor or query window. So by highlighting just this section of my entire query window, and then when I press execute, it will only execute the code that is highlighted. So that's a nice little feature. So let's execute that, and it's going to take a little bit here, but you'll notice that it looks nothing like the view, the human resources.vEmployee view. There's no names, there's no address information. Yeah, we have some job titles, but we don't have any just clean information. It's all these IDs, right? So let's just execute the view again. So everything's a little bit cleaner, everything's a little more consolidated, and this is actually why we create views, to make accessing information or accessing commonly requested information a little bit easier. And when we get into later sections, we'll talk about how to actually replicate this view with SQL code, and you'll see why using views can be so much easier if they're created for us. So we're just going to do one more little example because, again, querying a view and querying a table are almost identical at this stage in our SQL development. So just like we could specify particular columns within the table that we wanted to return to our results panel, we're going to do the same thing for a view. So let's clear our window, and let's say that we want to return the first name, last name, email address and phone number column from the sales.v individual customer view. So let's take a look at that view here in the Object Explorer. Sales v individual customer. You'll notice it still has the columns when we explore the view in the Object Explorer. There's a few other little things that are subtly different. Again, we'll talk about that at a later time. But here's the list of all the columns, so we can see and validate that those columns that I just said exist. And so let's just write a code to return that information. We're going to start off with select like always, and then I'm going to type first name, last name, email address, and phone number. And then we go to the next line. Which table or view are we going to select these columns from? And that's sales.v individual customer. And when we execute that code, we return the columns that we want for all of our customers that exist in this view. That's all I want to talk about this lesson. Not a huge piece. Just be aware that there is a subtle difference between views and tables, and that when you see us querying some views in some of the later video lessons before we get to joins, just realize that there's a subtle difference, but you can think of it as still querying a table, and we're not doing anything crazy or overly complicated. So I just wanted to get you familiar with that, and that should do it for this lesson. And actually, that'll do it for the basic select statements.